action. Good evening, everyone, and welcome into What's Your Issue? I'm Nixon Mbenji, and tonight's issue is the gender pay gap in America. According to the American Association for University Women, the median salary for women across all industries in the United States is only 79% that of the median salary for men. In just a moment, we'll welcome Gordon Wabi of the Men for Pay Equity Coalition to chat with us about the gender pay gap in America and what organizations like his are doing to see that it closes. But first, we'll go to Hannah Ragazzino, our field reporter, who's collecting opinions from our public.
Hi, Hannah Ragazzino here, representing MPAC in beautiful Narragansett, Rhode Island. We took to the town to interview the average citizen to see how they feel about gender equality and the pay gap in our country.
Why should a woman not get the same pay if she's doing the same amount of work and as accurate and whatever? And
I think it's unfair to women, especially if they have the same education as men and work the same amount of hours doing the same work as men. And if that's the case, they should be getting paid the same as men do.
I think that if you are doing the same job and you've been there the same amount of time, you should get the same pay. No questions asked.
And it is awful. It's a travesty that we don't get the credit that we should as women for what we do. I don't think we work as hard. Matter of fact, I think we have to even work harder to make ourselves known, and in so many ways that if we work really hard, there's some kind of negativity attached to that. So it's, but I'm afraid that you're right, that we have been quelched equally as far as pay and for what we can do and not getting paid the same.
I feel that we need to do more to close the gap because equality is important and because we're all made equal, and I think we should all be paid the same amount for the same work, you know what I mean?
Well, I do feel if a person is qualified for the job, they should be paid the same amount, not because you're a man or a woman. They both have the same schooling, you both have the same education. It should be based upon your ability, not on your sex.
I don't think it's right because I own a business and all women and men make the same amount depending on what they can do and how they perform. They'll be the same rate of pay. So I just don't understand how it's legal.
And Gordon is joining us now. Welcome, Gordon.
Thank you, Nixon. Thank you for having MPAC on the show.
My pleasure. Why don't you start by introducing us to MPAC for those who aren't familiar with the organization?
Sure, Nixon. The organization that I represent is called the Men for Pay Equity Coalition, as you stated, or MPEC for short. We're a civil rights advocacy group focused specifically on promoting pay equity for women and closing the gender wage gap.
Perfect, thanks. Let's jump right into the issue. That statistic I just read, that the woman's median salary is only 79% of the men's median salary, it can be confusing to some. Can you explain that statistic differently so that a layman might understand?
Absolutely. So let's just take your industry, for example. You're a man. What that statistic means is that in this country, on average, a woman with a talk show on television is only making 79% of what you make, on average, obviously. Now, many might think that you would be paid more because your show is more popular, thereby creating more revenue and enabling you to command a higher salary. However, that statistic is based on equal work, meaning that on average, a woman with a talk show that's comparably successful to yours is still only making about 79% of what you make. To us, that's unacceptable.
Gordon, what contributes to this pay gap? How did it come about, and is it getting any better or worse?
The pay gap has always existed. The issue rose to a level of prevalence in the early 1900s when women began to unify and fight for equal rights. Initially, women had to fight just for equal consideration for jobs, let alone equal pay. It wasn't until 1963 that Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act. The Equal Pay Act made it illegal to arbitrarily pay a woman less money than a man for equal work. Now, when the Equal Pay Act was signed, women were making only 59% of what men were making on average. Because of progress like the Equal Pay Act, as well as women's progress in education and workforce participation, the gap has shrunk. The problem is that there's still a large wage gap, and it's hardly budged since 2001, at which point women were making about 77% of what a man makes on average. In the last 15 years, women have only been able to close the wage gap by 2 percentage points, a considerable slowing from the progress made before the turn of the millennium.
Wow, that's interesting stuff. But didn't Obama just sign the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act? How does that fit into any progress still being made?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act wasn't necessarily progress as much as it was protecting the status quo and preventing regression. Lilly Ledbetter was a woman worker who took her employer to court over pay discrimination. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court unfortunately decided that Lilly could not claim discrimination for paychecks that she had received more than 180 days prior to the claim. And that's an example of some of the deficiencies with the existing legislations and the protections that are already in place, such as the Equal Pay Act. With the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, the 180-day limit was reversed, allowing workers who believed they'd been discriminated against to make claims for paychecks received more than 180 days prior to the claim. So again, it was hardly progress as much as it was preserving the status quo and preventing regression.
Now, this might seem like an obvious question, but in what ways does the gender pay gap actually affect women? What are some of the side effects?
Yeah, this is actually really interesting. I'll give you some statistics that I believe speak to that question. Between 1963 and 2012, the percentage of mothers who brought home at least a quarter of her household's income rose from 28% to 67%, meaning that as women take on the responsibility for more of their household's income, the entire family is missing out on things that money might afford them. So, for instance, those families are experiencing issues such as poor nutrition, poor education and recreational opportunities, and other things that a deficiency of money cause. So, one more thing though, the gender pay gap also affects women who've taken on loans for college. Because women straight out of college are making only 82% of what a man makes on average, these women have to pour a greater percentage of their income into their loan payments. It's not fair.
And one more question, Gordon, before we let you go. Your organization has come under some criticism for being called the Men for Pay Equity Coalition. Some believe it's a bit counterintuitive to only include men in the title and not men and women. What would be your response to that criticism?
Well, first of all, Nixon, I completely understand why it might confuse some people that a women's advocacy group would seem exclusive to men. However, that's not the case. Our club is just as open to women as it is to men. Interested women can join and work with us in every capacity that men do. The reason that we are called the Men for Pay Equity Coalition is simply because we believe that that title is more likely to attract men for membership. In our experience, men tend to view women's advocacy groups as a sort of pastime for radical feminists, an excuse to gather and take out their frustration towards men, but nothing to be taken seriously or to be joined in on. By calling ourselves the Men for Pay Equity Coalition, we dispel that common belief and make it clear right off the bat that our group includes men, and that if you want to join this cause, you're going to be standing beside both men and women, not just radical feminists. We believe getting on board with this cause and working to recruit and change the attitudes of men specifically is a necessity in order to move the cause forward. But once again, we're not an organization exclusively for men. We welcome women to our cause with open arms.
Of course. Well, Gordon, this conversation has been an absolute pleasure. I hope our viewers have enjoyed it as much as I have. I want to thank you for joining the show and sharing a bit about MPEC, and I wish you and your organization the best of luck in your fight, and we hope to have you on the show again soon.
Thank you very much, Nixon, and on behalf of MPEC, thanks for having us on the show.
My pleasure. Okay, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about Donald Trump's recent campaign comments. Stay with us.